Thank you. The next item of business is topical questions, and we now move to topical questions. Question 1, Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Visit Scotland regarding the organisation's website.
Minister Fergus-Ewing.
Presiding Officer, the content of the Visit Scotland website is a matter for Visit Scotland.
Thank you. Patricia Ferguson.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but he may be aware that at last week's Referendum Scotland Bill Committee, Nicola Sturgeon said they are public authorities. At any time, there are restrictions on how they behave. At any time, on any day of the week, and in any week of the year. I, as a Minister, cannot use the resources of the civil service to do certain things that are party political. Public authorities do not operate in a political way, and they will not do so during the regulated period any more than they do now. Now, that statement provides little reassurance given the evidence of the Visit Scotland website. So can the Minister tell Parliament what is being done to ensure that public authorities steer clear of party politics, both during the regulated period and at all other times?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I've rarely heard a more spurious and ridiculous accusation than I've heard this afternoon and in some publicity which was drawn to my attention today. I say that because the purpose of Visit Scotland is to provide information about significant dates, events and matters of interest in Scotland. Let me retail for other members some of the information on the website which Visit Scotland displayed. 1901, Queen Victoria dies. Not an event associated particularly with Scottish nationalist propaganda. 1914-18, Scotland plays a significant role in the First World War. 1919, the German High Seas Fleet is interned at Scapa Flow in Orkney. I could go on, Presiding Officer, to list all the other years and historical events that are important to our history. But the idea that merely displaying factual information on a website is somehow party political is really absolutely ludicrous. Had the website gone on to give some other dates, 1970, the interests of Scottish fishermen were expendable for the purposes of joining the EU, or 1975, Gavin Macron's advice to the UK Cabinet that the oil wealth in Scotland would be of enormous proportions, or 2011, the most humiliating defeat in the history of the Labour Party in Scotland. Had any of those dates been mentioned on the Visit Scotland website, then I think we might have the beginnings of some scintilla of evidence.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I have to say I'm astounded by the Minister's assertions this afternoon, because a website that can ignore the 1939-45 war that devastated Scotland and every other part of the UK, as well as most of Europe, but can record the election for 3 months only of the first SNP MP, must surely have to think again. So I would ask the Minister, in his calmer moments, to perhaps reflect upon the content of this particular website, to consider whether the evidence of that website is that these issues are ones that would attract people to come to visit Scotland, which is, after all, what it purports to do. But I would also ask the Scottish Government, as a matter of urgency, to provide guidance to public bodies to ensure that this partisan promotion, and it can be nothing else, does not occur elsewhere in public bodies promoting Scotland.
Minister.
There is still an unfortunate tendency with the ranks of those of the political classes to assume that conspiracies abound in public life, that Watergate is an omnipresent event in political actions. This is completely ludicrous. The facts are, Presiding Officer, that the Visit Scotland website contains excellent information for those who wish to holiday in Scotland. It contains a huge variety of information, and the reasons why people holiday in Scotland are wide and varied. And I would point out to the member that it was at the beginning of this year that the accolade was given by CNN, one of the world's leading media organisations, that Scotland was the #1 country to visit in all the world. And why did they say that at the beginning of this year? They said that, Presiding Officer, and this is a matter of factual evidence, not of assertion, that Visit Scotland are playing a blinder. And so they are. And I think they deserve support from all parties, not the kind of approach that we have seen from opposition politicians. So I very much hope that they will join those who recognise that Visit Scotland is indeed performing an excellent job on behalf of Scotland.
Patricia Ferguson.
Presiding Officer, I would take lessons from no one about support for Visit Scotland, and I would draw the Chamber's attention to my long record of supporting Visit Scotland in this Chamber and anywhere else where I've had the opportunity to do so, in spite of, at times, opposition from people who should have known better. But I would simply point out to the Minister, if any other evidence was needed, that the fact that Visit Scotland, within moments of hearing of my concerns, had actually amended their website to take on board just a few of the ideas and dates that I managed to come up with in a 2-minute discussion with others, shows that they recognised their website had got it badly wrong. So when will the Minister understand that it was wrong on this occasion? And what will he do to ensure that no other public body gets it as wrong as Visit Scotland unfortunately got it on this one, and I very much hope, isolated occasion?
Minister.
Well, I totally and fundamentally disagree with the assertion that any act, utterance or content of the Visit Scotland website can be said in any way to amount to any display of any bias whatsoever. It is simply not true. The fact is the website set out a number of dates, and these are a matter of history. The member is correct to say that Visit Scotland have subsequently added a number of other dates. That, I think, shows how responsive they are. It shows how willing they are to respond immediately to people in Scotland. Now, I know this to be true because, as the Tourist Minister, I've seen firsthand just how responsive Visit Scotland are when complaints are made. I know, Presiding Officer, that the Chief Executive, Malcolm Roughhead, in one particular case of an issue raised by a small business in the south of Scotland, went to visit that lady for a number of hours. He got out of his Clango office and he went out to speak to the public. That's the sort of leadership that Visit Scotland has displayed. I'm proud to be served by Visit Scotland, their leadership and their staff. They're playing a blinder for Scotland. And I'm astonished that this question is being asked of us today.
Marda Fraser.
Thank you. Does the Minister really think that the most important event in Scotland in 1945 was the election of an SNP MP?
Minister.
Visit Scotland did not express any view as to how important or otherwise any of the events were. It is not meant to be an extensive history lesson. That is not the role of Visit Scotland nor its website. The attempt of opposition politicians to try to infer from a series of facts set out on a website that there's party political bias just doesn't stack up. And were we in a court of law, then Mr. Fraser would be prevented from making any submission to that effect. Oh, that we were in a court of law, but sadly it is not to be. There are serious matters affecting tourism today. There is the level of tax imposed in Scotland on fuel duty, about 40p higher than in Mediterranean countries. There's air passenger duty imposed by the Conservative Liberal coalition, which is having a very damaging impact on tourism. And then there's VAT, which is around about the second or third highest level in Europe. Now, if Mr. Fraser wanted to ask about these questions, then I think he would at least be expressing concerns, which I heard about yesterday evening from members of the Federation of Small Business in Inverness, who are actually working in tourism. Nobody outside this chamber has mentioned this matter to me. I haven't had a letter from Patricia Ferguson. I haven't had any correspondence, any emails, not even any tweets on this. Nothing whatsoever, except from members of the opposition party in the chamber. I think that says it all.
Stuart Stevenson.
Presiding officer, I wonder if the Minister would, like I do, feel that it's good and useful that against 1888 we see that Keir Hardie followed the Scottish Labour Party. Now, of course, I might argue that the foundation of Celtic Football Club in the same year is a more important event, or the opening of Peterhead Prison in my constituency is a more important event. But that the existence of that, and indeed the founding of the STUC in 1897, is clear evidence that this website gathers to its bosom a wide range of interesting material.
Minister, if you can find a question in that.
Well, may I confess, Presiding Officer, that when I've listened over a period, I think of around 12 or 13 years, to Mr Stevenson, I've often concluded that my education hasn't been sufficiently developed, but Mr Stevenson is helping me to put that right. I agree that these are all points well made. The main conclusion about all this is Visit Scotland is there to serve the public, to promote tourism. It's doing that by setting out some interesting dates, some interesting points from history. It is not meant to infer any judgment or any view, and it does not. That is the point. And that is the point that a first-year law student could grasp within a nanosecond.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think, as we've already heard, the admission by Visit Scotland that they got it wrong, I think gives a lie to much of what the Minister's just said. But he cannot wash his hands of this. He and his Cabinet Secretary do set the agenda and the culture here. So can he perhaps state for the Parliament categorically that he does not want any more toadying by agencies responsible to his department?
Minister.
Well, I mean, there hasn't been any toadying whatsoever, so I think that answers that question. But, I mean, could I say, in all fairness to Liam MacArthur, with whom I've always had cordial and serious dealings, that his leader was reported in the press as suggesting that Scottish ministers, presumably myself, directed Visit Scotland to include this material on the website. Can I make it clear, I became aware of this issue around about 10 or 11 a.m. this morning, right? So I wasn't aware of it because I was too busy looking at serious matters affecting creating jobs in Scotland, getting investment to Scotland, promoting tourism in Scotland. That's what I do with my time. So I do hope Mr Rennie, making the charge that Scottish Government ministers somehow exerted pressure on Visit Scotland to put this material on the website, one of the most ludicrous charges that I've heard. I do hope Mr Rennie will take the opportunity to withdraw that ludicrous and utterly unsubstantiated assertion.
And that concludes topical questions.